Welcome back to My Cupcake Addiction, where today I'm making a cake that is actually too scary for me to properly research. You guys have been requesting a Stranger Things cake, and while I do not ever watch these types of shows because quite frankly they scare the absolute bejesus out of me, I am going to make a Stranger Things cake for you guys today, and I am being led by your comments, some Google searches that I wish I'd never made, and what I've managed to source online without ever having to watch the show. We're gonna make a Stranger Things cake. The things you'll need to make your Stranger Things cake. I found these adorable Christmas light necklaces online. I'll leave a link down below. They're about $4 each, optional extra, but they add a lot. Some brown food coloring, some little fairy lights with tiny battery packs, chocolate ganache, which I tinted black, a mini cake board, and I ended up using 2 of these, a black edible marker, a sponge, white candy melts, powdered sugar, some fondant. I colored mine ivory or very, very pale brown, a large cake board, or you can build like I did straight on a cake stand, some decorative light bulbs or light bulb candy jars. I've also got 3 batches of my chocolate cake. I baked each batch in an 8-inch round tin, and I added a tablespoon of black food coloring before I cooked. So I got like super black chocolate cake. As always guys, I will leave all of your measurements, recipe links, quantities, conversions, and links to handy things like this in the description box below. Let's get into our petrifying Stranger Things cake. To start off with, make sure each of your cake layers are the same height and relatively flat on top. Cut each cake layer in half so you end up with 6 same sized layers of cake, and you can build this on a cake board, but I found a cool spooky tall black cake stand and I'm going to build directly on that. Down goes my cake, and then a thin layer of black ganache, another layer of cake, and another layer of black ganache. Don't make these layers of ganache too thick because we're not going to add a central support, so you don't want them to bulge out the sides. Once you've got all of your cake layers on, you can put a nice thin crumb coat of black ganache all the way around the outside edge and on the top. Pop that off into the fridge for about 20 minutes to let it set, and then come back and put a second coat of black ganache all over the outside. I'm going to use an offset spatula, or you could also use a ruler here to get it nice and smooth. What you should have is a nice black as night, tall, smooth ganached cake with black cake layers in between. I'm going to put that off into the fridge while we make some of our topper details. For your little light bulbs, these guys here are little candy jars, and I just used a knife to core out the very, very bottom. They've got a tiny hole, but you can make that a little bit bigger so you can get your light strands through. The others that I found are different shapes and sizes, and these are actually Christmas ornaments, so they've got quite a large hole at the bottom. When choosing your little lights, go with one with a copper wire. I folded mine to make 3, so each of my filament light bulbs got 2 kind of long, skinny sections of light, and then I tied the copper wire around to make it look like one. It's supposed to look like the 2 spiky bits of the inside of a light bulb. Take a nice bowl of your ivory fondant and your smallest cake board. This one for me is a 3-inch. You could use a little cardboard here, and just push it down so that it makes a small mound. A little bit of white candy melt to secure in place, and I'm going to put the 3 of my light bulbs pressed into that fondant, but secured in place with a bit of that white candy melt. Something like this. We literally crafted light bulbs. I know. Take your ivory fondant now, and I'm going to sprinkle down a generous amount of just powdered sugar so it doesn't stick to the bench. Because this is such a tall cake, I'm not going to get you guys to cover it in one big piece. That's difficult at the best of times, but super hard on a cake this tall. You want a piece that's going to go around the outside and only as high as the cake, because we're going to trim it off and have a black top. Moisten the cake. I just used some paper towel and a little bit of water or sugar syrup. And then you want to stand your rolling pin up alongside the cake and wrap that large long piece of fondant around it. Smooth that fondant on, either using your hands or a fondant smoother, and then you want to run a pizza cutter around the bottom edge to get a really nice, neat cut against either your cake board or in my case the cake stand. Leave the top as it is. I'm going to take a sharp knife, and where my fondant overlaps at the back, I'm just going to slide the knife down, and I should make a nice cut between both layers, which enables me to have a relatively neat seam on the back. With your fondant overlap on top, take a super sharp knife and just trim it so that you've basically got a flat line in line with your ganache top layer. Be really careful here. It sometimes helps to cut off the excess before going in for your nice, neat line. Take that 9-inch cake board now. It's ever so slightly larger than my cake, even after it's been covered in fondant and all that ganache. And I'm just going to use it as a bit of a rough measure to cut a top circle of fondant. So roll your fondant out not too thin and use the board as a guide to cut a nice disc. Mark out kind of a wide circle on the inside of your disc and drag the back of a circle cutter through. You want to create a lot of drag here so it looks like it's been ripped or torn. I'm kind of trying to make the ripped effect the look of the portal that's in one of the walls, so I've researched in Stranger Things. Gently place that over the top of your cake in line with your fondant and just use your fingers to smooth it off so you've got a nice neat seam and that top disc sits beautifully flush against the cake. I want my filament light bulb centerpiece to be a completely standalone feature. So I'm going to take a second cake board, roll a bit of fondant out onto it, still in that ivory, and then cut a little well for the button battery pack to live. I cannot stress enough how important it is for you to remove this before the cake is served. Button batteries and wiring are definitely not something you want getting into your cake. So by making this a completely separate standalone illusion and by sandwiching those button batteries in between two thick cardboard cake boards, we avoid the risk of having them go anywhere into anyone's pieces of cake. Use all of those offcuts from tearing away at that top piece. They should be jagged, ripped, and quite ghastly looking. And use some water to attach them to the outside edge, covering up any of the joins between the two boards. You kind of want to peel them back a bit so it looks like the portal in Stranger Things, kind of like something's been just busted through the top of the cake. Now it doesn't quite look like something's just busted through the top of our cake yet, so I've microwaved a little of my excess black ganache and I'm just going to paint over my black fondant on the top there. So I've got this like big black, kind of gross textured excess in the center underneath those filament light bulbs. I've got a few different size paintbrushes here. I'm literally just gonna paint. Finally, a couple of kind of long crack marks in the top of that ivory fondant to complete the portal of the monster. The only part of this I'm not going to cover in ganache is again where I can see that little button battery pack. I don't want anyone getting confused here, so I definitely want to be able to see that poking out at the very back of my cake. A, so that I can turn my little feature on and off, but B, so that it is noticeable and not hidden. I'm going to divide my cake into kind of thirds. This bottom section I'm going to make look like the wooden wall or the wooden bottom half of the wall, and the top section is going to be that mottled kind of brown ivory patterned wallpaper. To make my wooden look, I'm going to use my smoother or something of the same size just to measure around from the cake board all the way up so that I've got a nice even line. I'm just going to mark that out in a few locations. Then you want something not too tall here. So I'm actually using this weird, it's like a wooden spoon, but it's got an edge on it that's not super sharp. The back of a knife would work. I like something like this. If you've got a tool, you can score it, but I'm just going to use that to come around and just make nice, firm indents. Be warned, fondant tends to spring back a little bit, so make them firm. Once I'm happy that I've got my planks of wood, I'm going to use my knife and I'm going to do like the front section that's super sharp, make a few little scores in the wood, and then I'll turn it over and I'll use the back section. So I've got some sort of more blunt ones. Don't worry about too much texture here. Finally, I'm going to take a thin strip, quite a thin strip. This is going to make like the border between the wooden wall and the wallpaper. I'm going to wrap that around the top of my wood detail and paint the whole lot with a little brown food coloring mixed with just a little bit of water or alcohol. I'm going to cut a sponge now and I want it to look almost like a small flower, but it doesn't have to be exact. And I'm going to use that like a stamp to stamp the little brown floral detailing all over my ivory wall. We're getting really close. So our wall is done, our portal is done, our spooky filament light bulbs are done. All that is left to do now is put on creepy lettering and then wrap around our Christmas lights. For my creepy lettering, I want to do 3 rows. I've got a little reference image so that I don't mess it up. And I'm also going to start in the center of each row. So for me, I know that my first row is going to be D, E, and F. I'll start with E, put the D and F on either side, which saves me starting A here and then either getting too far or not far enough. Always start in the middle with lettering. Now you could use an edible marker here, but I decided the effect of my black ganache is actually a lot more what it would actually look like. So I'm going to hand paint mine on in ganache. I knew from the second I saw this creepy wall on my very first Google search that there was no way I would be watching this show. We are so close. All that's left to do is to drape our Christmas lights. Like I said, these are necklaces. They're about $4 each. I think that they're a must-have for this cake. I'm not going to affix them to anything. Again, these are something that need to come off. So make sure that if you are serving these, people know that the little light bulbs are not edible. It is the risk that we run whenever we use a non-edible element in an edible cake. All that's left to do is light it up. What just happened to the lights? Did you just turn them off? I don't know what's going on. Everything went out. It's dark, it's creepy, and I can hear noises. Why did I make this cake? What just happened? I still flat out refuse to watch it, but I think I've managed to do a pretty good job of capturing Stranger Things in cake form. This one's a little too scary for me to think about bringing my kids into, so we are gonna leave it there. I hope you guys have enjoyed my tribute to Stranger Things. For all of those that enjoy it, I hope you love it. For all of those like me, I just wouldn't Google it. It's kind of petrifying. It looks like the scariest thing that I have ever even just seen Google images of. Don't watch Stranger Things. There's no need. There's no need. But make this cake because it's awesome and share it with somebody that does like to have the absolute bejesus scared out of them. Subscribe to the channel if you're not already for 2 new videos every week. And as always, thanks very much for watching.